There is an element of that, particularly with young black professionals, because we believe I've earned my stripes, I've gone to university, I'm not going to start at the bottom of the ladder. I need to be given a role already as a manager. And sadly, you find that when you come, you're fresh from school, actually you don't understand much even about work ethics. That's why it helps that before we actually finish school, we need to be exposed to the environment of work, because that's the best way to actually learn during holidays. Even if you just offer, even if people don't pay, offer to volunteer because even if it's an NGO, you will actually learn how organizations are run. But we never do that. By the time we get to a company, we think, oh, give me the role. But it's not necessarily with everybody. I would venture to say you find that people are in a minority, that it's those people that don't know enough about what they don't know that would normally demand that give me. But many people that actually know that they haven't had sufficient exposure would want to learn and want to contribute, and only then will they want to be given because they've actually earned it. But I think you do have an element of some of our young people feeling that because they've been to school, they are owed positions in institutions.
And how do we deal with that particular challenge in our society? Because let's be realistic, a lot of our graduates coming out of the universities and the institutions of higher learning are having major problems in securing the jobs that they're looking for. They are, some are just sitting at home, some are even doing work that they're overqualified for because of the lack of jobs. So is it a case of entitlement, or is it just trying to be ahead of the pack, trying to find something that differentiates you from the pack?
But again, for you to differentiate yourself, you need to make sure that you make a bigger contribution better than anybody else. You can't say you owe me because.
And contribution being the operative word.
Contribution is the operative word, because nobody owes you anything. Because when you look at it, we have a whole range of young people that are qualified, that cannot get jobs. So make a contribution. Having made a contribution, people will be aware that you've paid your dues by making a contribution, even if in certain instances it's things that have got nothing to do with your job. Because the other thing is that in many instances you find young people saying, no, but that's not my job. Even if it's making copies for the board, it is not necessarily your job, but you will learn because you will understand how the documents are packaged.
And you'll get to read the documents.
You will get to read the documents. You get to understand what's going on. So we do tend to say, it's not my job. It's too manual a job. I'm not going to do that. I'm paid here to be in finance. I'm not responsible for making copies, but making copies may just expose you to information that normally you wouldn't be exposed to.
And it would also open up, I'm thinking, you to people that you'd not be, because once you, as a CEO, ask me to make some copies for you, I then have a door open to come back and say, I was reading the report that I photocopied. Please can you clarify 1, 2, or 3? Immediately you then become aware of who I am, and that establishes some kind of relationship.
But also sometimes you find that young people think you can't walk to the office of a CEO. You can. You actually can. But because we think these offices are this big enigma. I had a very interesting experience where a young woman who was actually a temp in the company decided to come through and make an appointment with my PA and say, can I please see the CEO? And it was so refreshing. She said, well, I've been talking to my friend, and she said, what do you have to lose? After all, you are a temp. And believe it or not, I made sure that young woman was taken on a learnership in the organization when she lost a temp job, and we've just recently lost her to National Treasury. And I think
so she's been poached already.
But I think she's going to, because we could not give her what she wanted. She wanted to be in finance, and I mean we tried to convince them to say traditional finance is not the only thing you can do. There's other opportunities, but I mean, good for her. She's where she is now.
But that must be so fulfilling to see someone rise up and you're thinking, yeah, I cooked it well enough. I cooked her well enough. Grace and Limpopo, good evening to you and welcome, ma'am.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. I was just listening out to you, and I completely agree with what you guys said about unfortunately young black professionals, that we generally have a sense of self-entitlement, and we walk around as if the world or the industry, whichever one we're in, owes us something. I'm in mining, and when I first came out from school, I had to do not the lowest, but then something that's completely unrelated to what I studied. I did geology. And at that time, my boss kept saying to me that, you really have to earn your stripes. And there's no substitute for sitting out and paying your dues and making sure that, despite the fact that you have had all these years of education, you can still go out there and say, you know what, I'm going to start from scratch. So it is sometimes disappointing when I see people that are my age that feel that they have to really start out there from scratch, and you don't really have your feet on the ground yet. But now, what I found frustrating is that the fact that I didn't have a mentor, and it's still a source of frustration now, because I do want to get there, I do want to get my hands dirty and earn my stripes, so to say. But now it's difficult to get a mentor.
Why? Grace?
I'm sorry?
I was asking, why don't you have a mentor? Is it a case of not finding the right person? Or is it a case, what exactly are some of the challenges that you have in identifying and communicating with a mentor?
I think maybe it's just not finding the right person, and maybe not really knowing where to look first.
Okay.
I could have gotten that at work, but then there's a lot of pressure, and people are just busy.
Okay, all right.
And you want somebody, and like I said, you don't want somebody who will sit there and spoon feed you. You want somebody who will tell you and be honest with you when you're making mistakes. Because, that can only prepare you for the next role that you're going to be in.
Okay.
So that is a source of frustration, because you have all this energy and this willingness to really do it and earn your place. But now you don't really know where to start.
Grace, listen on the radio. I'm going to ask Totsie Memela-Khambula, CEO of Eduloan and committee member for the Standing Committee for the Revision of the Bank Act with the South African Reserve Bank, to give you some pointers with regards to how to approach a mentor. She is also a member of the International Women's Forum. So thank you so much for calling in and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you very much. I'll listen.
Thanks, Grace in Limpopo. Maybe you also are a woman in finance who'd like to share your experience with us, some of the frustrations or challenges that you're facing. 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207, or SMS 34701. SMS number is 34701, and SMSs are charged at R2. What advice would you give to Grace Ostros?
Grace, I think there's a lot of women now that are in mining that may not necessarily be in Grace's company. What I would suggest to Grace is, as she reads about people, or as she gets to know who are people that are either own mining companies or work in mining companies, it's to actually pick up the phone or just Google them, get their email and write to them. Because sometimes we think, no, how do I approach Bridget Khadebe and say, can you please mentor me? Even if it's not Bridget, even if Bridget Khadebe doesn't have the time, Bridget Khadebe will find another person that can help and support Grace. And I believe, like most women in IWF, that if a Grace approached Bridget, or even just do research on women that are in her industry, just send an email.
Or get into the networks, because I know that there's a Women in Mining network, there's also South African Business Women's Network, there are various women's networks that support women and put women together with mentors.
Yeah, I was actually saying to one of our young colleagues to say, sometimes we think, where do I start? Just go to Businesswomen Association, join, it's 500 rands a year, become a member. That's how you will get an opportunity to actually network with other women, or any other institution that supports women that may exist in your environment. Because you'd be surprised when you meet these women in these social gatherings, they're just ordinary people.
Absolutely. Azia in KZN, hi and welcome. Azia? Azia, am I saying it correctly? Okay, we seem to have lost Azia there. Ma'am, As someone who sits on several boards, as someone who is the Chief Passion Officer of your organization, you also started off at very humble beginnings, working your way up in the financial sector. You're currently now a committee member for the Standing Committee for the Revision of the Bank Act with the South African Reserve Bank, and various other portfolios that you also carry. What advice would you give to young women who are looking not only to get into the financial sector, but already there and looking to grow?
It's education, education, and education. Whenever we get exposed to new roles, it becomes very important to make sure that you learn about that particular industry or about that particular role. For example, when you're still at junior levels, it's very important to find tutors that can help you with the basic technical skills. For example, when I first came into banking, I never thought I was ever going to work in a bank. I then went to work to understand what are the banking principles. I went to then what is called now UJ, just so that I could know what banking is all about. Beyond that, what you need to do is to make sure that you've got mentors and coaches as you grow in the organization, as you become a manager. Look upon other managers that are more seasoned in management so that you can learn. And as you grow and become a leader, look for coaches, people that are leaders in their own right, in their own field, that can help guide you. So there's nothing that is shortcut. It's learning, and make sure that you continually expose yourself.
We're talking to Totsie Memela-Khambula, CEO of Eduloan and committee member for the Standing Committee for the Revision of the Bank Act with the South African Reserve Bank. We're talking about women in finance, and we're talking to Totsie Memela-Khambula, CEO of Eduloan and committee member for the Standing Committee for the Revision of the Bank Act with the South African Reserve Bank. Later on, we'll be talking to the NYDA on calls for it to disband, calls coming from various youth brigades and youth movements. But right now, we're looking at women in finance, and we're taking the last couple of calls coming in from you. Good evening to you, Lulu, in the Free State. Welcome onto the Talk Shop.
Good evening, Masichaba. First of all, thank you for your excellent program, always, especially this evening. Wonderful wisdom and hints, etc. Although I'm retired, I wish I had your guest as my mentor much earlier or when I was still working full-time. Anyway, I'm so sorry. In humility, I wonder if I may make two little suggestions.
Please go ahead.
I've never been in business. Yes, I have worked in business, but as a journalist, in private enterprise and also in the civil service, in the field of museums, education, etc., not in finance. Okay. Two little suggestions. The first is perhaps very, very unimportant, but I think it'll help. Dress the part. Dress for the job you're aiming at. How we're dressing, it doesn't mean widely expensive outfits. What I find works best is black with, jacket, skirt, or jacket and pants, conservative blouse. You've got the picture. I didn't say more. Unless it's unthinkably old-fashioned for today's very, very knowledgeable young ladies. But for what it's worth, the other... I'm so sorry, I have a frog in my throat.
No problem, man.
The other suggestion is far more serious. What I found worked for me is get yourself... a qualification in public relations. Marketing, which is so popular, has been apparently the last number of years, doesn't seem to be sufficient. Public relations, which includes marketing, depending on how you look at it, is far wider. And whatever your field, as I said to students of mine, I taught part-time at the University of Pretoria. I taught, lectured on public relations for museums. And I used to say to them, even if you own a bicycle shop, with which there's nothing wrong as long as it makes money.